Hey everybody, welcome to my new series, Painting Big Tiny Tips, which is meant to be a series of short videos talking about kind of the building blocks for beginners. I'm Anne from Reaper Miniatures, and the first thing we're going to talk about if you're just starting out in miniature painting is miniature holders. All right, so the holder. Many people who start painting miniatures, and I saw this at my paint club at Reaper all the time, is they would come in and they would grab the model and they would just hold it by the base, right? And so that's what you do, right? You don't know any better. But in reality, it is much better to put your miniature on something. Yes, even the Red Bull Energy Shot is an option. You want to put your model on something because that gives you something to hold. You're not going to rub paint off on the miniature. So you obviously can use anything you like, but there are some different considerations to talk about. So the first thing we're going to talk about is size. Obviously, you want something that is suitably sized for the model you're working on. If you're working on 28, or this is Games Workshop Beastgrave model, she's a sweet mini. I just use these cheap wooden blocks. You can get them from Michael's, Hobby Lobby, you can order them off Amazon. They're very inexpensive. They're obviously, you can hand them out to your friends. They're very, very giveawayable to newbies at your club. Or you can, just your average, you can make a conga line of these things. You buy a bag with a ton of them, which I do like about it. But I like that they're the perfect size for a 28 millimeter. You can even use them for a much larger model. So this is a 75 millimeter, but she's a halfling, so she's only about 55 millimeters tall. So I've mounted her on the same sort of base. Because she's tall and narrow, I'm able to do that. One consideration with size is you want to be able to lay the model down easily without it rubbing or putting a lot of weight on any parts. So essentially, if you draw a straight line up the back of this, you can see that it's very easy for me to lay her down if I just want to be careful and make sure she's not going to get knocked over. Same thing with Fawn Girl here. I can lay her down and not put up a lot of pressure on any of the points that are sticking out. The second thing you want to think about with size, and here's another example. Here's a bigger block with Sphinx. When you're moving up with bigger models, you do need a bigger holder in general. But you also want to think about comfort with holding, right? So this isn't too bad to hold. I can kind of cradle it in my hand. I can hold both sides. So it's not terrible. These little guys are maybe a little bit more comfortable for my smaller hands. And so I gravitate toward, say, a smaller holder because I have smaller hands. If you've got larger hands, you should aim for a larger holder. Comfortable round things are generally more comfortable, which is why, although this was originally a joke, this is why the Energy Shot is easy to hold. And yes, it's filled with pennies, which we'll talk about the next thing, weight and stability. That's actually a great segue. So first tip, the size of the holder should fit the size of the model. Second tip, it should be comfortable for you to hold no matter what size of model you're working on. Scale up or down, find an appropriate shape, go for it. Third, weight and stability. The problem with the wooden block is that it isn't very heavy. So it is possible, to knock over the model. Obviously, I have to try a little bit though because it's got such a nice flat bottom. It's also short, so it's a little harder to knock over on that. These guys are taller. This is a miniature from Game Envy called the Hobby Holder. It's very popular. So it's got a very comfortable grip for me, and it's also got a slightly weighted bottom. So it's much easier, it's harder for me to knock this sucker over. It'll wobble, but it's actually, I feel pretty secure leaving this on my desktop. I'd have to really hit my desk hard to make it to fall over. As mentioned, you can use hollow things like film canisters. Pill bottles are a great favorite of everybody. Just keep your old pill bottles, take the labels off, and throw pennies into them. And that is a nice weight to keep things upright. So you definitely want stability. Some miniature holders are like a spindle or a dowel that have a holder to set them in, and that's nice also. This one is very stable, but because it's so lightweight, I still get a little nervous about it. So choose something that you can be confident in, right? Finally, reusability and cost. So a lot of people I see use bottle caps off of plastic bottles, and the big thing about the hobby holder is that it's brilliant. You can actually use any lid from a standard water bottle and screw it onto the hobby holder. This enables you to keep a whole bunch of lids with a whole bunch of miniatures on, stuck to them, and you could just switch out whatever one you're working on. So that is the brilliancy of this design. Again, that is from Game Envy. It is the hobby holder. It also is worth mentioning that the hobby holder has a little attachment, and if you're new, you might not know what these are for, right? But this clicks on and clicks off. And here is another one with another one. Well, what this is if you, once you start painting, you'll find that you tend to do this. You tend to prop your finger on the top of the model to paint because you're trying to get a stable grip. So essentially, this bar or this bar is meant for you to do that, but without rubbing paint off your models. You can stabilize your hand, but not rub paint off the top of the head. Final thing is, of course, cost. Obviously, for the hobby holder, the switching in and out thing doesn't cost you anything, but the hobby holder itself will cost you money. The wooden block option is extremely cheap. You can get a bag of 16 or 20 of these, very like $2.99. So, and of course, they're super reusable and recyclable. So there you are. Pill bottles are free with your prescription. So again, the Games Workshop, holder is also an option, but it is going to cost you more. You can also, this wooden one that I have, I kickstarted, so I got a bit of a break on it then. You can still buy it. It's got a nice finish. It's going to cost you a little more. So weigh in all of these things when you're looking at miniature holders, but do use something so that you don't rub paint off your miniatures. All right, that concludes our first episode of Painting Big Tiny Tips. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm going to be continuing on with all sorts of topics like brushes and thinning your paint and palettes and all the things that you kind of need to know when you're a new painter, and maybe you learn them piecemeal. But here, this will give you a chance to just kind of go through and touch on all these different bases depending on what you think you might need some advice on. All right, thanks so much for tuning in. Again, this is Anne from Reaper Miniatures. I have a Patreon at patreon.com/paintingbig, where I give all sorts of color and miniature painting advice. I also have a Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/paintingbig. We do a Thursday afternoon stream around 4 p.m. USA Central Time. You can also catch me on Reaper Miniatures Twitch, twitch.tv/Reaper Miniatures, every weekday morning at 11:30 a.m. Central Time for their show, Pro Tips. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you had fun. We'll see you next time.